Thanks for joining today's Third Thursday webinar hosted by Synapse Energy Economics. I'm the moderator for today's webinar, Pat Knight. And today we'll be talking about the Avoided Emissions and Generation tool, or AVERT, which is a tool that Synapse developed alongside ERG on behalf of US EPA. We have a lot of really interesting things to cover today in terms of what's new in AVERT and talking about some interesting analyses that we here at Synapse have done, along with analyses that other folks at other organizations have done around the country over the past couple of years. So first I want to talk a little bit about webinar logistics. The webinar today is being recorded and will be circulated to everybody along with the rest of the slides. You may notice that I'm the only person talking right now, and that will be the case throughout the webinar except for the other presenters. We actually mute all of our attendees on entry, and you will remain muted throughout the webinar. But that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. We absolutely do want to hear from you. If you have any questions or comments about what we're talking about within the webinar, please go ahead and send an email to webinar@synapse-energy.com, and we'll remind you of that address a couple of times throughout the next couple of slides. Throughout the webinar, as we get questions in, we'll try to work them in. Otherwise, if we get any questions, we'll address them during the Q&A session, which is at the end, or we'll try to get to as many of them as we possibly can. If you do have questions about sort of technical difficulties, like problems with the WebEx software, or if you can't hear us, please use the chat feature located in the WebEx software. It's over on the right-hand side. We'll be sending messages throughout the webinar, reminding people what the questions email is, webinar@synapse-energy.com. But if you have any other questions or comments, you can go ahead and use that as well. So before we dive into the content of the webinar, I want to just give a quick introduction to who we are as a company. We are Synapse Energy Economics. We're an energy and environmental consulting company in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary last year. Pretty exciting stuff. And here at Synapse, we focus on economic and technical analyses across a wide range of different topics, including emissions, coal and gas plant generation, renewable technology, electric vehicles, energy efficiency, and a whole host of other topics, which we've also done other Third Thursday webinars for in the past. And you can read all about those on our website, and you can also watch them. They're all on YouTube, just like this webinar will be at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Robyn DeYoung, our colleague from US EPA, who's here to talk about AVERT and all of the new and improved features that we've added to it in the past year. So Robyn, we're just handing you the ball right now. I think your screen should be coming up in just a second, and there it is. Great. So, Robyn, I don't know if you're still on mute, but we can't hear you.
Yes, thank you. Can you all hear me now?
We can hear you now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the AVERT webinar. Today I'm going to talk about what's new with AVERT and also give everyone a little bit of background. It looks like we have over 70 people today listening in from a mix of municipalities and private organizations, state organizations, and I'm hoping this will be very interesting to you and you can pick up the tool and run with it as soon as we're done explaining how to use it and what all the great things have been done with AVERT. So I'm going to first give you an introduction of why we developed AVERT in the first place. And I'm in the state and local energy and environment program. I've been at EPA for over 8 years, and we work directly with environmental professionals, air quality planners, state departments of environmental quality, and local governments alongside of NGOs and other organizations. And what we have been hearing from them is that they're always looking for new ways and innovative ways to reduce emissions in order to improve air quality, mitigate greenhouse gases, and with the overall goal of improving people's health. Meanwhile, over many years, and you can see from the chart, the investments have been increasing over time in terms of energy efficiency spending. States and municipalities and utilities have been advancing these energy efficiency programs and policies and renewable energy programs through renewable portfolio standards, energy efficiency resource standards, and other amazing programs. And we saw an opportunity here. We wanted to demonstrate the emission benefits of energy efficiency and renewable energy so that environmental regulators and other professionals could show all of the great work that's already being done from an emission standpoint, a public health standpoint. And not only that, in a general sense, what if we gave an opportunity to include that in Clean Air Act plans, like state implementation plans to attain the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. EPA also has a voluntary program called the ADVANCE program where people can avoid being designated non-attainment for these National Ambient Air Quality Standards that EPA is required to create and to protect public health and keep the air clean. So, but the thing is that there were a number of barriers getting in the way, and one of them was how do you quantify the energy impacts? People could do it, but it wasn't easy, and it normally wasn't free, and if it was, you didn't get to the level of sophistication that people wanted. So that is why AVERT was born. We created AVERT because we heard that there was a need, and so we decided to build this tool. And what the tool does is it translates the energy impacts from energy efficiency and renewable energy programs to avoided nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, fine particulate matter, and carbon dioxide emissions from the power sector using publicly available information. All of the power plant information that's across the United States in the AVERT model is reported to us by utilities, and it's all transparent so that everybody knows exactly where the information is coming from. And we wanted to make sure that this calculator was user-friendly, as well as transparent, like I just said, and credible. And so we went through a rigorous process. We went through a peer review, internal and external peer review process. We had beta testers test the tool to tell us if we needed to make it more user-friendly. And we also benchmarked AVERT against a standard dispatch model, ProSim, so that we could be confident in the results that came out of AVERT. To use the tool, you do need to collect some data. You need to come to the tool with the energy saved from energy efficiency programs. I have here megawatt hours. You might even need gigawatt hours. You can just convert that from kilowatt hours if that's the measure that you're using from your programs. Or if you're looking at wind or solar or other renewable energy, you need to know what the nameplate capacity is of that installation in megawatts, because AVERT already has load shapes. They have the time of day that the solar and the wind are generating electricity based on actual information that we've collected from projects across the U.S. And there's multiple options in the tool that I will discuss in our live demo that will be coming up shortly. So you get your data, you locate the region depending on where your state is. If your state is crossing over to 2 different regions, our user manual discusses how you can accommodate that situation. And then you run the model, which we will be doing live today. Now, I am the project manager for AVERT. It was initially released in 2014, and when we did release it, we only had CO2, NOx, and SO2 emissions in there. We did not have fine particulate matter because we had to do a little extra work for that. But 2014 is when it was released as an Excel-based tool. And then the next year, we published our first paper at the US EPA's International Emissions and Inventory Conference. And that's when we really dived into the difference between different technology types. We looked at wind, solar, and peaking type of energy efficiency programs, and then what would a portfolio of programs look like? You can get that on our website, and I think Nina might be talking about that later today, looking at different profiles. We did a lot of training and outreach. We have video tutorials on our website if you wanted to understand how to use the Excel-based version, the statistical module, and the other versions on our website. So you can learn all about that there. And then in 2017, we changed our methodology a bit from gross to net. I won't get into details there. Feel free to contact me if you're interested. But we wanted to make sure that the parasitic loads and the transmission distribution line losses were accounted for in AVERT, which they weren't before. And then we added fine particulate matter so that you could get a better sense of the health benefits from reducing fine particulates. And we also decided to generate emission factors so you didn't have to use the tool if you wanted to do a quick analysis. A year later, in 2018, which is where we are today, AVERT 2.0 was launched on May 30th of this year. And the big thing there is we added a compatibility component to our tool called COBRA, the Co-Benefits Risk Assessment Model. And what that tool does is it can take emission reductions and turn that into air quality benefits and monetized health benefits. So you can look at the monetized benefits of reducing asthma attacks and premature deaths and reducing a number of health incidences. So now there's an easy way to do both emissions and health analysis using both AVERT and COBRA, EPA's tools. And then the web-based tool was launched as well, which is what I'll be working on today, or showing you today. And we have 2017 data available. We annually update our data. So in this year, we updated the 2017 data in May. Next year, we'll update 2018 data in about April of 2019. You'll get the 2018 data. Now, where does AVERT lie within the spectrum of emission quantification approaches? It is an intermediate approach. It uses historical information based on how power plants have generated electricity and produced emissions on an hourly basis, and you can look at how the time of day differences in different energy efficiency programs and renewable energy technologies affect a cohort of utilities and power plants in the tool. It is more sophisticated than using an e-grid emissions rate, and it's less sophisticated than using an energy model, mainly because energy models, and there's a whole host of energy models, but the ones that have capacity expansion function can look out to the future, like 2050. AVERT's not meant to do that. AVERT's only meant to look at near term. And then the energy model also has more user-defined constraints. You can look at cap and trade programs. You can look at a variety of economic parameters that AVERT can't handle. What AVERT does is it takes what actually happened in the past and uses that as to figure out what might happen in the near-term future. The applications of AVERT are many. Number one is we really wanted to make sure that we had a tool that could be accreditable for EPA's regulations, which the state's National Ambient Air Quality Standards, Clean Air Act plans, which are also called state implementation plans for short. You can use AVERT calculated emission reductions. You can plug it into an air quality model. We have compatible outputs for that, and we're actually working with our Eastern Regional Technical Advisory Committee, ERTAC group, which is a group of multi-jurisdictional organizations that do air quality modeling analysis for the state departments of environmental protection. We're working with them to make AVERT compatible with their power sector emissions and air quality analysis. so that it can easily and seamlessly be included in any future state implementation plan that needs to be developed to meet the ozone or particulate matter NAAQS. You can do a lot of comparisons between different technology types. One thing I wanted to plug is GridPick is a tool that uses AVERT as its engine to get the emission reductions, and they have specific load shapes for smart grid technologies and EVs. So check that out if you wanted to get something like that. The only difference, well, there's a number of different differences. One of the differences, you only get regional information. Our tools give you state and local information, county information. You can use AVERT Web Edition, which I'll go through in a second. And the emission factors have 4 different categories. So if you have a wind project, you can do a quick multiplication and figure that out. But the tool's so easy, you might not even need to do that. The other thing is that just to hone in on this, is that it's not a long-term projection tool. If you're going to do an analysis that is out to 2030, 2040, AVERT is not your tool. eGrid emission factors is not your go-to either. Neither of those are meant to be used for very long-term projections. So if you wanted to use AVERT for a longer-term projection, like maybe say 5, 10 years out into the future, then you need to use the AVERT statistical module. And that is where you can retire and add power plants and unit level information so that you can represent the future and run the tool. That's it for advanced users. And we have our video tutorials explain that. We have over 80 citations of reports, analysis, peer-reviewed papers, and resources that use AVERT, which makes me happy because that means that people are using it and they're finding it useful, especially when you see all of the peer-reviewed papers and the different journals that AVERT is now in. And there will be a number, Jamie and Nina from Synapse will talk more about some specific information on how it's been used. This is AVERT's modules and data files, so everybody understands the structure of AVERT. On the top left-hand corner, you have raw hourly data that is reported to us. And then we have a statistical module that generates all of the statistics for, every hour of the year. How is each of those power plants operating and different regional demand load levels? And based on all of those statistics, we then know when you enter energy efficiency renewable energy on the grid, lowering demand or increasing renewable energy, this is how the units will operate. These are the ones that will back down and be displaced. And we take all of that data, we put it into a regional data file so that you can use it and upload it into the main module. And you will, if you use the Excel-based version, you would only need to download the regional data files in the AVERT main module. With the web-based version, it's just all integrated for you. On the bottom left-hand side, the future scenario template is an example of where you can do this user-defined additions and retirements, and then you'd have to be able to know how to run the statistical module on your own. AVERT 2.0 supports the public health analysis because we are able to now combine both energy, we can go all the way from energy efficiency, renewable energy, to public health, and we're developing monetized benefits per kilowatt hour factors. The acronym is BPK for short. So we're running AVERT and COBRA doing a number of different scenarios so that we can give you all a $1 per kilowatt hour factor, so then you can just multiply, oh, well, I saved this many kilowatt hours, this is what the monetized health benefits are, and it's even easier to show what the monetized health benefits. You don't even have to run the 2 tools anymore if you don't want to. All right. Let's jump into the web-based version. I know I only have a couple more minutes left, and this is brand new. We're super excited to put this out. It's one of the first applications that EPA is putting out that is hosted on cloud.gov. And what the platform does is it allows you to quickly estimate the program impacts, and I am going to now go online to the actual tool. I am now on the website right now, in the tool, this is what you see when you come to AVERT Web Edition. And this, oh, I need to go back to the region because I was playing around with it earlier. So this is what you do. Your first step is you select the region. I'm going to select the Northeast. Or you can, all you have to do is click on any region here, or you can use the drop-down box. 2 methods to get to your region. You then scroll and say Set EERE Impacts. It loads that regional data file in the background for you, so you don't have to do it yourself. Then there's a lot of different options here, A through E. Now, if you need any conversion help, we have this up here, and if you need to convert a kilowatt, megawatt, or gigawatt to a gigawatt hour or kilowatt hour, here's how you do it right here. It explains it all right in front of you. And the scenario I'm going to do today is one from actual data. We have EIA, the Energy Information Administration, has a form called 860, and they report what's planned for renewable energy or renewable energy that's already been added to the system. And they say that in 2018 there's going to be 91 megawatts of wind. So I'm going to go down to letter C here. You click on the letter, and I'm going to put 91 megawatts of wind. And they also say there's going to be 40 megawatts of utility-scale solar going in this year. And that's 2018, and this data set is 2017. So you want to always use, just so you guys know, this tool will always have the most recent data available. And so right now the most recent data available for AVERT is the data set for 2017. And we're saying, okay, well, if there's all of this additions in 2018, what will the air look like in 2018 because of all this great new renewable energy that's being put on the system? You can also do energy efficiency. If you know your gigawatt hour number, then you put it in here. We'll not do that one today. If you wanted to do, if you know you have a broad-based program, let's say you have a lot of different programs and you know what the percentage is in the region, you can, let's say there's 1% of reduction for the Northeast, you can put that in here. And I'm just going to delete that so we can just see what happens when you do renewable energy. So I'm going to calculate the EERE impacts, and that will come up here. And now this is the hourly profile. And then you ask to get results. The tool is now looking at all of the hourly information. It's looking at the emissions for NOx and SO2 and CO2 and particulate matter from all of these different states, and now you get the output. So we have regional displacements across the whole entire Northeast region. Here we have what was original, what was new, and right here in the EERE impacts is the emission reductions or avoided emissions from that scenario. And then you have the states. I thought everybody who looked at this might really like to have a table with all the states, so you can look at all of the different pollutants by state. And then maybe you want to create a graph and put it on a PowerPoint presentation by your state. You can select your state, let's say New York, and now you have a graph that shows the reductions of SO2, NOx, CO2, and PM2.5 all in different pretty colors. And then you can go here and download it in different formats, and you can easily put it onto your PowerPoint or documentation. You can also go to the county level and scroll the county that you're interested in right here. And then lastly, we have these outputs for people that want to maybe download the results for COBRA. You can just click this button, or you click on this button that gets the county level information generically. It gives you tons and percentage reductions by county, and you can play around with that if you wanted to use it for something else. All right, I'll turn it back. That's all I had for today. I have some contact information, I think, on this final slide. And please, oops, sorry about that. Please contact EPA, avert@epa.gov if you have a question, and happy to answer questions while we're on the phone. Thank you.
Great. So, Robyn, do you want to pass the ball back to Jamie? We'll give it over to him.
Trying to find the...
Thanks, everyone, for standing by. We don't always get the opportunity to do a webinar from 2 different locations, so thanks for your patience.
All right. Thanks, Pat, and thanks very much, Robyn. A quick reminder to our listeners that if you want to submit questions, we would love that. We'd love to take them and answer them. And so please send those to webinar@synapse-energy.com. So here we have a sample list of organizations that have used AVERT for analyses, reports, fact sheets, all sorts of different things. And earlier in the presentation, I know Robyn presented a slide that looks similar to this one. So why are we showing this again? Well, we mostly want to highlight the wide range of uses that AVERT is used for and emphasize its versatility and how many different types of things you can do with it. And you can see from this list that there's a very diverse range of AVERT users. Organizations include the Solar Energy Industries Association, Vox, the media company, the Sierra Club, and the Connecticut Green Bank, a few commissions, a whole bunch of different organizations. And now Nina and I are going to focus in on a few select AVERT studies. So first we'll look at a study that was done by us here at Synapse earlier this year for an organization in the western United States. I was on the research team, and one thing that we were interested in exploring was the amount of incremental generation and the associated costs from that incremental generation from electric vehicle charging loads in Colorado. So we used AVERT to get a screening level estimate of the incremental generation from 2 different electric vehicle load profiles. One represents a charging profile from a low EV scenario, and the other represents the charging profile from a high EV scenario. And the graph on the top right shows these 2 profiles. You'll see the low scenario in the blue line, and the high scenario is the yellow line. And of course, the high scenario assumes many more electric vehicles, and so the charging load from those additional vehicles are going to be much higher. The 2 scenarios were developed from estimates of electric vehicles representing the number of electric vehicles assumed in 2020, so that's our low line, our low scenario, as well as 2035, and that's our high scenario. And of course, it's not realistic to expect the electric vehicle load from the high scenario to manifest tomorrow or even next year, but this analysis examined what the incremental generation would look like if that were to happen. So we put these 8760 charging profiles into AVERT using the manual input feature, and that returned hourly incremental generation. So for both of these 2 scenarios, we found incremental generation by fuel and unit type, as you can see in the table to the bottom right, and that we found it for coal, gas DC units, and gas CT units. And we then multiplied the incremental generation by assumed per megawatt hour generation cost coming from AAO 2018 to arrive at resource-specific incremental generation cost. And so I'll just point out a few things in the table on the bottom right. We see in both scenarios that coal makes up the most of the incremental generation at 60% in the low scenario and 58% in the high scenario, followed by gas CC units and then gas CT. I will note that we did not add or retire any units for either of these scenarios. That is to say that we didn't make any assumptions about what units may be retired or added in either the low or the high scenario, but we did sanity check the AVERT results against the results from a production cost model that we had on hand. And I'll also note that, as Robyn mentioned earlier, we don't recommend using AVERT for analyses more than 5 years out, as there are, of course, a bunch of different factors that may change significantly during that time period. That includes fuel prices, the retirement of units, and many other things.
So, Jamie, before you go on to your next slide, this is Nina. I am most often using AVERT to decrease load profiles. I've never used it to increase load profiles. Did you find that easy? What was that analysis like?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and this is my first time using AVERT for increased load, and it was surprisingly extremely easy. All we had to do was take the 8760 load profile and turn all those numbers into negative numbers when we put that into AVERT, and that represents that it's an increase in load rather than a reduction in load.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, great.
So next we're going to turn to a report from LBNL, which was released in 2017. The team used AVERT in their estimation of climate and air quality benefits coming from continental U.S. wind and solar generation from 2007 to 2015. And they used AVERT to find the SO2, NOx, PM2.5, and carbon emissions that were avoided from this wind and solar generation. And so the two figures on the right show the avoided carbon and avoided SO2 emissions from this generation. You'll see the avoided emissions for wind in the green lines and the avoided emissions from solar in the orange lines. And there's also a black line which represents the total power sector emissions. And so that uses a different scale. That uses the scale on the right-hand side of the graph, which is a much larger scale. And for example, if you look at this figure on the bottom right, you'll see that total power sector emissions line decreasing from 2007 to 2015, and that just represents a continuous decrease in SO2 emissions during that time period from the total power sector. So the team used the output from AVERT, those hourly avoided emissions, to generate economic and health benefits by applying a suite of air quality models, which they describe in depth in their report, and you can use the link at the bottom of this slide to go ahead and read that report and learn more about that. And one of the models that they used was COBRA, which Robyn introduced earlier and which Nina will be providing additional examples of in just a few minutes. And this is a really good example of the ways in which AVERT and COBRA can be used in tandem, because they took those hourly avoided emissions from AVERT, and from that they're able to estimate the monetary and physical benefits from those avoided hourly emissions. Finally, I'm going to talk about an analysis which was conducted by the Public Utilities Commission in Maine in 2015. They used AVERT in the development of their valuation of distributed solar, and specifically they used it to generate the avoided environmental cost component of that distributed solar valuation. So the Commission had several PV fleet production profiles. They had a base case, a max capacity scenario, and several others, and they took those PV fleet production profiles and put them into AVERT, and from that they were able to calculate, or they received the hourly avoided emissions from those PV profiles. And they used the hourly avoided emissions to then calculate the annual avoided emissions per kilowatt hour. And finally, they multiplied those values by some assumed social costs of carbon, SO2, and NOx to arrive at final benefits in terms of dollars per kilowatt hour of PV. So if you look at the figure on the right in this slide, you'll see the value of solar by profile sensitivity for the entire value of solar, and so that includes everything from avoided fuel price uncertainty, which is the top part of that bar, to avoided energy costs at the bottom. And what AVERT was used to generate were those purple components of these bars. And the topmost purple component is, the lightest purple color, is the net social cost of NOx. right underneath that, the slightly darker purple, is the net social cost of SO2, and below that is the net social cost of carbon. And the net social cost of SO2 is the biggest of those three, which suggests that the benefit from SO2 is the greatest of the three emissions that they modeled. I'm now going to turn this over to Nina, who's going to talk about a few more examples of AVERT analyses.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. It's always really interesting to see all of the variety in the different analyses we can do with AVERT. You know, I'm using it for pretty specific things most of the time, and it's a nice reminder that you can branch out and do more things, particularly that LBNL study, which I think, again, will have something to do with what I'm going to talk about with COBRA in the next couple minutes. I'm going to walk through a couple of different analyses, the first that we've done in-house at Synapse and the second that I prepared for this. So this first analysis is a marginal fuel type analysis. If at any point you want more detail on it, we did write a blog post about it that you can find at the Synapse website at synapse-energy.com. And we really were, myself and Ariel Horowitz, a colleague, were working to try to illuminate the marginal generation patterns from 2007 to 2016 using the AVERT data. Generally, when we think of using AVERT, we're thinking of energy efficiency and renewable programs. So we're trying to lower load, reduce those high demand peak hours that grid operators have to ramp generators up to meet. And the marginal units are the most expensive generators that are online in any hour. Those are the units that are going to come online very last because they're very expensive when demand is high and grid operators need to ramp up to get to that peak. So AVERT generally, when you're modeling energy efficiency programs or renewable programs, the first plants that you're going to displace are those extremely expensive marginal generators. So we took a look at what those marginal generators were in 2007 versus 2016 and how they were operating. Traditionally, the most expensive marginal units have been natural gas units, and that's sort of the perception. They're often called natural gas peakers. However, when we compare the 2007 and 2016 AVERT data, we see the proportion of marginal coal increase significantly. Marginal coal actually nationally comes on par with marginal gas generation in 2016. This is largely due to decreasing natural gas plant costs. Gas prices have gone down as fracking has increased and coal has become relatively more expensive to operate. And so there's more likelihood that they're going to operate as those peakers. I will note that this shift is happening across the U.S. We see it in all of the regions across the analysis, save New England, which has very few coal plants remaining, and so not much coal that is able to act marginally. Another important point is that this marginal coal increase is not due to an increase in total coal generation. Coal generation across the country is stable or decreasing in every region, which indicates that this marginal shift towards coal is not generation related, it's operation related. The way we're operating coal plants has fundamentally changed over the past decade. So I'll take a moment to describe the chart to the right here. You'll see the x-axis represents the proportion of generation avoided by energy efficiency or renewable programs from gas and coal. And then that y-axis is just the region, the typical AVERT region. The top bar on the chart, you'll see the national proportion of marginal coal versus marginal gas, and you see an increase in marginal coal nationally. The regions that are seeing the largest shifts are the Rocky Mountains region, the lower Midwest, and Texas. And down at the lower end of the chart, you'll see the Northeast with a slight increase in marginal gas. So if I go to the next slide, AVERT allows us to do unit level analysis, and that's one of the most exciting pieces of the work we do with this tool. In this case, we put together a case study of one coal unit in Ohio. This is the WH plant, Unit 4. The unit itself is about 180 megawatts, and it sits within a 2,200 megawatt coal plant. And when we sort of dove in, we found this same base load to peaker operational shift on the unit level. So looking more closely at this chart, if you take a look at the x-axis, you're looking at regional demand. So on the left, at 0%, you have a system with no demand for any energy, or for fossil energy in this case. And then all the way to the right is peak demand, so that's going to be the highest possible demand for energy. The y-axis shows us the likely megawatt output, and so each of these dots is the likely unit output at any level of regional demand. So the top series here in light gray is representative of the 2007 output in WH-SAMS. And you can see that most of the dots sitting above 100 megawatt unit output or a high level unit output come after 30% of regional demand. So most of the time, more than 30% of the time, the unit is operating above 100 megawatts. It's operating a lot and all the time. At the bottom, this black dot series, you see a completely different pattern. All of the dots are clustered towards the bottom left-hand corner of the chart, and it's only past 70% of regional demand that the unit ever gets up past 100 megawatts to that high level of output. So you're only seeing that high output in very few hours. The rest of the time, it's not even operating at its full level. And that middle series, the dark gray series, is sort of a transitional place. In 2012, we saw the unit following the load shape. And you see that because you see a generally linear series of output to regional demand. Yeah.
So before we go to the next slide, I have a quick question. I think that this is a really interesting analysis, and when I was reviewing the list of reports that use AVERT, this one seemed particularly unique in that it focuses in on a single unit. And I'm wondering, why did you choose this unit for the analysis?
Well, I think you could do this analysis with many coal units of its size. This happens to be a particularly large plant in Ohio, and we knew that it was slated for retirement in 2020 and wanted to ask the question, is there a reason that it's slated for retirement operationally? Not just a story of environmental regulations, but in fact that there's an indicated, that it indicates a lower need over time for that plant. But I think you would find that trend in other plants, not just this one.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah, and again, more details on this analysis, including the emissions impacts, which is more detailed, but just as interesting, can be found on the Synapse blog at synapse-energy.com. All right, so I will step into our last analysis of this webinar. A reminder that you can send in questions to webinar@synapse-energy.com. But for now, I'm going to go into a bit of what Robyn was talking about earlier and what Jamie touched on, which is the new ability with the AVERT Web Edition to work with this COBRA health impacts tool. So as Robyn walked through a bit earlier, COBRA as a tool takes emissions reductions profiles of the type that AVERT outputs and processes them into air quality profiles. It then takes those air quality numbers and estimates the impact on specific health indices. It can then pull those health indices numbers and translate them into economic, real dollar health impacts. So this is analysis that I pulled together earlier this week with our new Web Edition tool and produced my own maps for a very generic test project. So in the AVERT web tool, I set up a broad-based EE program, which Robyn demonstrated earlier in the webinar, and I allowed a 10% generation reduction in California, representing an energy efficiency program or a renewable program that reduces load by 10% in every hour. I processed it through the web tool. It took 3 minutes, and then I exported the emissions profile in the COBRA format. Then I plugged that output into the COBRA tool and took them, ran that tool, and created these maps for our use. The top map here is the PM2.5 delta, and you're looking at it at a county level, the emissions reduction that was an impact of this 10% generation decrease. You'll know that the impact is outsized in the southern half of the state to begin with, and then the second two maps at the bottom of the slide are actually those COBRA outputs. Red is the avoided hospital emissions, and the purple map represents the economic dollar benefit. As Robyn mentioned earlier, there's a really wide variety of health indices that you can measure: avoided heart attacks, infant mortality, asthma impact. I chose avoided hospital admissions just because. This red map represents all avoided hospital admissions related to respiratory issues, and then the purple map is the highest estimate of the dollar health benefits by county across California. You'll note that the health benefits and dollar health benefits are all concentrated near the population centers. In the south of California, that's LA, and then in that northern piece, it's the counties surrounding San Francisco. This makes sense. This is what we expect to see. You're going to see the most health impacts from emissions reductions in places where the most people live. Emissions reductions are particularly concentrated in those population centers, and then those economic health benefits do tend to be somewhat more diffuse around the population centers. So this is just one simple example of analysis you can do using AVERT and COBRA together. This is something that is straightforward and easily downloadable from the EPA site. So with that, I'm going to end my slides and end our highlight of AVERT analyses. I think we're really looking forward to questions, so we'll open up the floor.
Thanks, Nina. Thanks, Jamie, and thanks, Robyn. Again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and send them to webinar@synapse-energy.com. We already have a bunch of questions in, so I'm eager to dig into these in the next 15 minutes or so. So first, I have a question for Robyn. Robyn, do you mind talking a little bit about how AVERT differentiates the emissions from regional, state, and county level? Does it look at transmission? I'm also curious if you could talk a little bit about the types of power plants that go into AVERT and what that data source is.
Sure, yeah, that's great. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we have power plant information that's reported to us, and that is units that are 25 megawatts or larger. And that we basically do a bottom-up approach. So we have all of the units, the electric generating units in AVERT, and let's take the Northeast region. So in the Northeast region, you saw that there were a number of states within that Northeast region, and every unit that is operating in, let's say, 2017 is that's 25 megawatts or larger will be represented in the Northeast. And then what we do is we aggregate that up to what is the emissions and generation at the county level, and then we aggregate that again up to the state level, and so we just add up all of the units that are located within a state, and that gives you what the state emissions and generation is, and then you can add all of the states up to the regional level. And so when we're doing an analysis in AVERT, because we have such granular data at the unit level and at the hourly level, we're able to know the group of units across that region, how they're operating, how they might be displaced because there's lower demand on the system because you assume there was energy efficiency happening. And then AVERT takes all of the unit information and it groups it into the geographic boundaries. It groups it into the county level and the state level and the regional level in the tool.
Thanks, Robyn. I have another couple of questions for you, so I'm going to try to do them rapid fire here. First is a sort of a practical, logistical one. Can AVERT be used on Mac computers?
Yes, it can. We were getting that question pretty frequently when we first put out AVERT, and so yes, you can use the Excel version and the web version on Mac computers.
Here's another one. I've got a question from somebody who's curious about impacts of impacts of energy efficiency in terms of load shifting. So maybe like a demand response program where you have hourly increases in some hours, or you have demand increases in some hours but decreases in others. And I'm worried if you could just talk a little bit about how one might use AVERT to do that.
Sure, that can be done in AVERT. We did not demonstrate that here today, but if you wanted to look at specific hours and increases and decreases per hour, you would need to download the AVERT Excel-based version, and when you do that, you will be able to use our manual data input entry function. That is the same one that Jamie mentioned when he did the EV load shape. So if you know the hourly ups and downs, go to the main module on our website, download that, and then download the regional data file that you want. And when you go to the set energy efficiency renewable energy step number 2, that is a green button on the top right-hand side. And we, I think, have a video tutorial that explains where and how to do that.
Robyn, I've got another one for you. So I've actually been getting in a bunch of different questions about the types of resources that we currently analyze in AVERT or are currently analyzable in AVERT. So I'm hoping that you can talk a little bit more about the types of resources that are covered and maybe some of the resources that might be covered in future versions. So I'm thinking of things like portfolios of energy efficiency or distributed versus utility scale solar or onshore versus offshore wind.
Yeah, sure. Well, AVERT does a good job of doing renewable energy technology types. So we have already built into the tool, we have utility scale solar and we have rooftop solar that you can add, if you know the megawatt capacity of that installation, you can put that in. We have onshore wind. We do not have offshore wind. So if you're doing an analysis, the load shapes already in AVERT only look at onshore wind. So you would need to know what the time of day changes are for any offshore wind project. That would actually be a manual energy. You would have to manually enter that in. And then for a portfolio of programs, let's say you have a lot of different residential, commercial programs for lighting and HVAC, et cetera, et cetera. What I recommend is that you assume, you go to, if I had the tool I would show you, it would be the section B of the online tool, and you would enter a percentage reduction for broad-based programs. And what that does is you assume that there's a percentage reduction happening every hour of the year. So it's scaled based on the regional load, and that will reduce demand every hour of the year by whatever percentage you determine up to 15%. We recommend you don't go above 15% of regional load because then the grid operations will probably change differently than what happened in the past. And that is probably the best way for you to estimate the broad-based portfolio of energy efficiency programs in your region or your state, is to use that percentage reduction.
So I have another question for Nina. Our questionnaire, I think, is thinking back to the slide about the change in marginal emissions from coal to gas. And I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about the, what makes certain regions different from others. I see that the dashed line there, which is the transition, is larger in some regions than others. And
sure.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I haven't taken a deep dive into each of these regions, but generally what the increase in any of these regions means is that coal has become relatively more expensive than gas than in other regions. So there's something pushing the Rocky Mountains and the lower Midwest regions in Texas that makes those gas units more economic and makes the coal units less so.
Robyn, I've got another question from you, and it's a question that I've seen a whole bunch of times, actually. Are there any plans to expand AVERT in the future to Alaska and Hawaii, or to other regions that aren't the continental U.S.?
Yes, we get that question a lot. We don't have the data set to expand it outside of the 48 states. So if there could be a way to do it if we had hourly reported generation emissions from Hawaii and Alaska. If that data is available from the power plants in those regions, we could do it, so that could be investigated. And if you're outside the United States and you wanted to do something similar to this peer-reviewed credible approach, then you would also need to get the generation and emissions reported on an hourly basis from either your government or from the host of utilities of the region that you are interested in doing it, and then you could replicate this methodology for those units. So it could be done. We could explore it. It's not in the near-term future for expanding AVERT, but that is something that I'll put on our list to take a look at.
So, Robyn, do you mind talking a little bit more about the inputs that go into the solar and wind capacity factors, how those were developed and how they are representative of particular regions?
Sure, I can do that. And everyone who's remaining on the phone, thank you for staying with us. The exact information is in our user manual and one of the appendices. And what we did is we worked with AWS, and they had project-specific wind data so for wind, we had project-specific wind data, and we took 3 to 5 projects in each region and calculated what the average load shape would be for those actual projects, and that is how we created the load shapes in AVERT. And then for solar, we used the tool called PV Watt to develop the solar load shapes for each of the regions. And Pat, feel free to add anything if I missed anything there.
No, I think that's how I remember us putting those together. I want to say here that we've gotten a lot of really great, very specific questions, and unfortunately we won't be able to get to them all today, but I do want to mention that we have a lot of really great resources online. If you go to epa.gov/avert, there's a user manual, there's a quick start guide, there's other videos which EPA has posted talking about AVERT and doing deep dives into a lot of different topics, like, for example, the renewable capacity factors, or questions about how you make different EE portfolios, or how you take AVERT and export data from it into other tools. So if you are interested, again, feel free to follow up with us here at Synapse or Robyn over at EPA. But I'd really encourage you to take a look at the epa.gov/avert website, where a lot of this information is already posted. So that brings us to the end of our end of our webinar. Echoing Robyn, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. And if you asked a question and we didn't get to it, we're really sorry about that. But thank you anyway. So if you, again, continue to have questions, feel free to send them along either to that webinar at synapse-energy.com link or to one of the other links that Robyn posted, which can connect you straight to the EPA. I just want to say one last piece here, that this is our third Thursday webinar series. We have another third Thursday lined up for next month. That's July 19th. Topic is TBD. If you have ideas for topics you'd like us to cover, just shoot us an email and we'll talk about that. So thanks again to everyone, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye.